This episode is so very simple. It's an 1808 recipe for roasted onions. Come along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. This recipe is from a very popular cookbook from the early 19th century. It's the New System of Domestic Cookery by Rundell. It shows up in a lot of different places. And it's interesting because here in the early 19th century, we can start to see a shift in cooking. And the idea that something as simple as this shows up into a cookbook, usually those 18th century cookbooks are a bit more fancy cooking. This is simple home cooking. Let me read to you this recipe. It's so very simple. Roast onions should be done with all their skins on. They eat well alone with salt only, and cold butter, or with roast potatoes, and with beetroots. So again, the directions are almost, there aren't any really. She doesn't tell you what temperature to bake them. So we're going to take the idea of baked potatoes and say, what happens if we want to bake an onion? That's what we're basically going to do here. Some of these recipes from the similar time period talking about doing it in a Dutch oven. We're just going to do it in a standard oven. Today you could do it in an earthen oven. That'd be really good. And we're just going to be using a standard largish medium yellow onion because she doesn't tell us exactly which kind of onion we should use. She's probably thinking you're going to use whatever onion you have available to you. No, for real. This is all we're going to do. She said, make sure to bake these with the skins on, so don't peel them. We don't cut them. We just roast them. We just bake them. I mean, we could do it in a Dutch oven, but we're just going to take these just like they are, put them in our oven. And again, same kind of temperature and time as you would a baked potato in the same size. So maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes at 350, whatever you would do with a baked potato of a similar size. So let's just put these in the oven. There are our onions. They've cooked up and they've cooled down just enough so that they're not too hot to handle. Again, these cooked 35 minutes, 40 minutes. And I believe that what we'll do here is to extract them from their shell. I just want to cut the very bottom, if I can get it to cut. It's so soft. Just cut the very bottom off. There we go. And now we can just squeeze it right out of its shell and into our serving dish. And just take that right out there. And there is our onion all ready. And we can cut this, add a little bit of salt. So let me cut this. Frankly, this may have been the easiest recipe that we've ever done on this channel, but I'm very interested to see just how it turns out. I enjoy baked potatoes and I enjoy onions, and I couldn't imagine a dish that was just this simple, especially showing up in a cookbook from almost the 18th century. It's the early 19th century. So let's find out here. She says that you could eat it just with salt. And that's the only thing. Let me tell you, these are really good. All by themselves. Not usually we have something, onions like this maybe with a pot roast. That might bring in a bunch of other flavors. But this is just the onion by itself. And with butter and salt. It's amazingly good. Truly. I can imagine if you weren't well-to-do, if your larder wasn't full, if you didn't have any meat available to you, you could have a very good meal on just onions roasted. Amazing. We've all heard the saying, American is apple pie. The question is, what are the real origins of apple pie? That's what we're going to be looking at today. Thanks for joining us. So where does American apple pie come from? Well, if we look back in the cookbooks and we dig back to, say, the early 19th century or, say, 1850, that's when American cookbooks really start to, you get a lot of them. 1824, Virginia Housewife, you'll find an apple pie recipe that you're probably used to. If we dig back a little bit further, we get back to the first American cookbook, Amelia Simmons's American Cookery. She's got an apple tart that's we might still call an apple pie, but the origins have to come a little bit deeper than that. If we dig back a little bit deeper, another 20 or 30 years, we find some English cookery cookbooks which have apple pies. Kinds that maybe we are a little bit more used to. Today we'll be looking at a particular apple pie recipe, very similar to others, out of the Universal Cookbook. This one's done by John Townsend in 1773. Let's get started. You're looking for pie apples to start off with. We've got some Golden Delicious here. That's going to work. The Jonathan apples make a nice pie apple. In the time period, you'll see a lot of references to codling apples. Again, those are a cooking apple or a baking apple. That's what we want for our apple pie, and that's what the recipe calls for. We need to pare our apples, so we would need to take the peels off with these. And we're going to save these peels. We're going to use them in just a little bit. Once we've got our apples peeled, we can quarter them and cut the cores out and then set our apples aside. And now with the peels, we want to take a little saucepan and you can take all your peels, maybe even some of your cores, but I wouldn't do that. But take these peels a little bit with a little bit of water, and what we want to do is set this over the fire and kind of boil this down. You could even use apple cider as instead of the water. What we're doing is making a concentrated apple saucy flavor that we're going to add to the pie in a little bit. So let's just put this on a low simmer while we work on the rest of this. Now that our apples are pared and cut up, let's work on our pie plate so we can start to assemble this pie. Now this recipe is not like a standard apple pie that we would do. We would put a crust in this entire pie plate. But like so many of these English pie recipes, this one calls for puff paste, and the puff paste just goes around the lip or the outside edge of this. So obviously we're not going to have a slice of pie like we expect today. That's not how they would have necessarily served it. So I've got a little bit of puff paste here, and we're just going to put it around the outside of our dish. There's our paste, at least our lower paste. We actually are going to cover this pie up later on. Now we get to put our apple slices in, or at least the first part of our apple slices. So we put in a layer of apples. And obviously, depending on how big your pie plate is, you may only need a single layer. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a whole lot more than a single layer in this one, but we're going to get a layer of apples in the bottom. After we get our first layer in, we can add a little bit of sugar here. I would put in maybe, it depends on the sweetness of your apples, but, and of course the recipe says sweeten to taste. So I'll go with about 1/4 cup, maybe a little bit less, and then we could put a little bit more apples in here. Actually, before we put in the next layer, let's put in our spice or our added flavor, and they call for lemon zest. And so actually chopped up lemon peel. So I got what we would call lemon zest, the very outer layer of lemon. We're going to put that in here, a nice goodly amount. And I'm going to add a little bit of lemon juice while I'm at it. And this will give it a nice tart flavor. Before we put in our last layer, we can put in a little bit of spice here. There are not many spices called for in this other than the lemon here, but possibly a little bit of nutmeg, or usually even cinnamon isn't talked about until we get to the 19th century. So we're going to go with a little bit of nutmeg. Don't need very much in this. The apples are really going to carry most of that along with the lemon juice. Let's go ahead and put in the last little bit of apple. Some recipes, especially early on, they really turn these apples into more like apple sauce. But we want them to still have some body, like an apple pie that we're used to today. And this recipe does call basically just for quartering them, not even small slices. So we want them to still be apple-like when we take them out. For some extra spice, add a blade of mace to the peels and the cider. So our peels and the cider and a little bit of mace is boiled down. And we're just going to pour a little bit of this over the top. This will give an extra sauce down in the bottom. Now the final part is to add a little bit more sugar up on top. Again, about the same amount as you put in the lower section, maybe a quarter cup. Again, depends on the sweetness of your apples. And this is ready to have the top crust put on. You'll want your crust to seal up, so you might want to add a little bit of water to the very edge. And this is all sealed up and it's ready to go in the oven, in a modern oven, in your kitchen. You'll probably want to set it to 375 degrees and it'll probably cook for, let's say 35 to 45 minutes. You'll be able to tell by the top crust. If you want it to get a real nice brown color, you'll probably want to brush a little bit of egg on top to get a nice color to it. Let's get this one going. There's our pie. It looks wonderful. It's cooled off enough that we can handle it. Now, normally we might serve it just like this, but all these recipes sort of agree that we're going to do a little bit more to this pie. First step is to cut the top of it off. I'm just going to slice around the top of this, and we want to take the top off. Now we're not going to discard this top, obviously. There we are. Oh, smells wonderful. Smells very nice. So here's our old pie there. Next up, what we need to do is pour in a special custard. Now, John Townsend's recipe in the Universal Cook, he does not do a very good job of explaining what's going on with this custard. And you know what? We'll do a different episode specifically on this custard, but now we're going to take this custard and pour it in to the top of our pie. There we are. And you want it to sort of cover up the entire top of it. There's our custard. Now we're going to set this aside for just a second and let's deal with this top that we had. Now it calls for cutting the top up in triangles, little triangles. I don't know how big, it doesn't say, explain that. So we're just going to cut this up in slices and then turn those into triangles. Now we take our little triangles and we put them in here. Now it says there are a couple different directions maybe, but they're all very similar. We can either lay them around the outside edge, and we'll do a couple like that. I guess it said with the points out, just to make it look festive, because this is sort of a complicated recipe, so it probably is meant for festive occasions. And then we can put some that are vertical if we can get that to work. I guess it all depends on how thick our custard is. So we're ready to serve this up. Now obviously, since we can't slice this out in regular pie pieces, it's just going to have to get put into a little, into individual servings. Just kind of scoop it out here. And make sure to get one of those triangles of puff paste, because you know that's going to be good. And there we are. We'll set this that one aside. Whew. Smells really, really good, and I can see where this custard would come in. I mean, we like to eat our apple pie with ice cream. They had ice cream in the time period, but it'd be a lot easier to make a custard like this. So let's find out how it turns out. Wow, whoa, what a wonderful combination. Puff paste, custard, apple pie, all built into one. Really, really tremendously good. I love this, going back just a little bit deeper and finding this English recipe for apple pie right out of the late 18th century. So today's main ingredients are sirloin and bacon. What could possibly go wrong? Thanks for joining us today. So we've been working through this series. We're trying to understand North American food today, and we're going back into history and we're looking at these other cultures that influence our cooking today. This recipe is from 1787. It's from a German cookbook, the kind of cookbook that possibly German immigrants would have brought with them, and you can definitely tell it's related to our cooking today. Let me read to you this recipe. Now this is translated. It's translated by the folks down at Winston-Salem at the Old Salem site. They've done a tremendous job. They've got a couple of these cookbooks and they're kind of translating through them. I'm not sure if this is published yet, but we've got one of these pre-works here. So let me read to you. This one's actually called Roast Sirloin in a Sauce. And I'll just read to the top part. We'll get to the sauce later on. You will thickly cut some bacon and ham. In a dish, lay the pieces of bacon out and lay the meat on top of it. Add some salt and pepper. Use a whole onion and some root vegetables, bay leaves, some wine. Cover it up and set it on a small amount of embers. Be sure to turn it often when it is cooked and yellow. Make some little flour yellow and put it in the broth. Okay, so obviously these directions certainly need some interpretation after the interpretation. It's one of those tricky things. Kind of, we're trying to look at sort of difficult to understand German writing from the 18th century, and then, twist it into English. And we also have the historical way that they would have written out recipes. So got to do some interpretation here. So today, the cut of beef we're using here, this one was listed as a London broil. We want something that would be a pot roast type of piece of meat that we need a nice big thick chunk. And of course I've got some nicely thick cut bacon. We're going to use a Dutch oven for this baking. This is the perfect sort of dish to use a Dutch oven with. They didn't get really specific, but obviously they called for something that had a close fitting lid. That's the important part of this dish. We need something that has a nice close fitting lid to keep this moisture and juices in. So let's start to assemble this. We've got our Dutch oven here. Kind of pick a size that's going to work for the cut of meat that you've got. First thing that goes in here is the bacon. We're going to take our big thick slices of bacon. We're going to place and sort of make a bed of bacon in the bottom of this. So we've got our bacon bed laid down there. Now we're going to put in our cut of beef here, and we'll just lay it right on top of that bacon. And now we have let's see, it calls for some salt and pepper. So we've got some salt here. And obviously you get to choose about how much you'd like. I enjoy my pepper, so we're going to pepper that nicely. If you really want, you could add some other spices in here that you think would go well with the meat. Something that might be common in the English cookbook would be even nutmeg in a dish like this. I'm not going to put in nutmeg this time. Now it's time for the root vegetables. We've got some common ones here. I've got some carrots, we've got some turnips and parsnips. Cut those up into medium-ish small pieces here so that they're going to cook well. And I'm just going to sprinkle those around the outside edges here, getting them spread out nicely. After the root vegetables, we have our onion. We're just going to leave that whole. That's just in here for flavor, and then we'll take it out. And we're going to pour in some wine to kind of fill this up, and about a cup or so of wine in here. I'm using a sherry, which in the time period they would have called a sack wine. Very common in cooking. They didn't specify the wine in this particular recipe, so I'm just going to a classic for the 18th century, which is a sack. This is ready to go on the fire. We're going to make sure our lid fits on well and take this and put it over our coals. So we need a small bed of coals. I've got some coals already cooking along here. We're going to separate out some coals, kind of make a ring of coals that we're going to set this on. We don't want the center bottom to get too hot. And this is a slow cook. And so we're not going to have a whole bunch of coals underneath here. We're going to have to play around with this. This is, if we're cooking in a Dutch oven. If you're doing this in a regular oven in your modern home, hey, you're just going to place your Dutch oven in the oven, set the temperature at about 325 and let it go for a couple hours, depending on the thickness of your cut of meat. But this one, we're going to have to We're gonna have to take care of it a little bit more and watch it. So I've got a smallish bed of coals going here. Okay, now we have to go ahead and put a few coals around the top here to keep this heat coming in from the top as well as the bottom. We probably want to have a few more on the top than we actually had on the bottom. Even in our Dutch oven, in our fireplace, or out in the field, this can easily be cooked out in the field. We need to continue to watch this. It's going to take another, approximately 2 to 3 hours, depending on the thickness. And there's the other direction there that it said to make sure to continue to turn it. That was right there in the directions. That's one of the classic things. You can kind of tell what kind of pot they intended you to cook this in. Because of the type of cooking, low and slow with the coals, you have to occasionally pick up your pot and turn it sort of 90 degrees, say once every 5 or 10 minutes, so that it gets a very even heating underneath. And we can even do that with the top, where we can turn the bottom one direction, turn the top the other direction, so it continues to get a very even heat. Of course, if you're using a modern oven, you don't have any problems like that at all. We're making the sauce now, and this is a little bit different than the ones we've done in the past. The base of this sauce is sour cream. So it says a few spoonfuls of sour cream. Let me get some sour cream going on here. We don't, again, no measurements whatsoever here. So we've got a few spoonfuls of sour cream. It says to also add some lemon juice. So I've got the juice of 1 lemon here. And it also says this a few lemon slices. I'm not sure whether in the original language it actually meant the zest of a lemon or the peel of a lemon, or I'm just going to go ahead and go with the directions here and just put a couple of slices of lemon in it. I know it seems a little strange. And then again, oddly, certainly not what we would do in a modern recipe, it says sugar to taste. Again, okay, let's add some sugar. Of course, sugar to taste means however much we think is appropriate. I'm going to put about a teaspoon, maybe 2 teaspoons full in here. Let me take this over to the fire, put it on a very gentle heat, and bring this up to a very low simmer. That should be about right. After 2.5 or 3 hours, this meat should be nice and tender. Let's remove the meat and the vegetables from our pot. Add a little bit of water or beer, and then sprinkle a little bit of flour in that. We're making a nice gravy. Leave this on the fire just a very short amount of time. When it thickens up, we can go ahead and put that on our meat to keep it nice and moist. Well, this smells tremendous. And this sauce that they had us make up, this white sauce, very, very interesting. Certainly nothing like I've done before. I can't wait to try this. I mean, really, smells good. These vegetables look so rich, and the meat looks great. So let's give it a try. Wow. That white sauce, very, very interesting, because it's got that lemon juice comes in there and gives us a little bit different flavor, almost like a vinegar would do in this, along with this white sauce that makes it very, very rich. And of course, we've got these wonderful soft, vegetables that have been infused with this meat flavor. And of course, we had that gravy that they had us, make in the bottom of the pot to pour over the top. So it's like really 2 sauces in one, or sharing it, so we can switch from one to the other. Tremendous flavor, and doesn't hurt having a little bacon in the bottom of the pot, right? This is a fish pie from a 1650s French cookbook. It smells great. It's so much fun to make. Let's find out how it's made. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. Well, this recipe comes from Laverine's Cookery. This is a translated and edited version that's been done very recently of a book that was originally printed in France in the 1650s, and then almost a couple of years later it was translated into English in the 1650s. So there's a French version, there's an English version, and then this sort of modern translation. Excellent cookbook if you're really into what's going on, the transition of French cookery from the 16th, 17th, and into the 18th century. This gives you that glimpse of what is going on right here in the mid 17th century. Excellent cookbook full of wonderful recipes. A lot of these are high-end recipes because this is a bit more like court cookery, but there are a lot of simple recipes also, and you get to kind of see about what's happening with the fish. One is a great example where it'll say, you know, how to do a salmon pie, and then it just says all these other fish types is like, oh, the same as the salmon pie, just do the same thing over again. So you can see how different recipes, he gives you a lot of room to do adaptation. So this dish is actually a little bit more of a medieval style of cooking fish. This shows up in this recipe book, but by the time you get to the 18th century, this style of cooking fish sort of disappears, but it's very, very simple, and it's gonna look neat, so that's why I wanted to do this recipe. So we need fish, right? So, you know, I don't have access. We're not here on the coast. We're here kind of landlocked. So I went out to where I can get fish, and what I got that I thought looked interesting was a mackerel. So we've got a mackerel for a fish. I think we can use a lot of different varieties. You can use freshwater or saltwater fish for this kind of recipe. I've got simple salt and pepper. We've got a little bit of ground cloves and a little bit of vinegar along with some melted butter. And then of course we're gonna need our pastry shell. And here's our paste, and really we can use just about any kind of paste we want here. We could use a puff paste. He doesn't, in the recipe book, get really specific about this because we actually aren't necessarily going to eat this paste. It's basically a cooking vessel, right? So I've got our fish here. Obviously, it's already been, you know, gutted and gilled, and I've took the fins off, things like that. If it needs to be scaled, you should scale it. This particular guy, mackerel, doesn't really need scaling. The skin is gonna basically come off when we take our paste off. But we want this piece of pastry so that it goes all the way around the fish, kind of shaped for the fish here. But we do kind of want the whole fish. We don't want to, you know, have slices of it. That's a kind of a different recipe. So we got our whole fish here. We're gonna put it in the center, and let's start off with a little bit of salt on this guy. Let me put a little salt in there, and on him we definitely want pepper in here. And the recipe actually calls for larding this fish, which we're not going to do, and it's a little, wasn't sure exactly how they wanted to lard it, so I decided I'd skip that part, and I don't have any eels or carp on hand. But when they did that, they also used, when they did the larding, they also used a little ground clove, so I put that in here. Now we're gonna put a lot of melted butter on this guy. And this is basically our larding here. We want to have a lot of nice oil in here with this fish, and that's going to make him really good. We're going to get a lot of that inside there. Yes, I'm using a feather for the brush for this. A very common use here in the time period where we need to brush things on. Okay, good. We got a nice coating. It also calls for a sprinkling of vinegar in here before we close it up. So we're going to go ahead and put just a little bit of vinegar up on top. And now we can go ahead and set our top crust on top of our fish. Now we want these two crusts to join up properly. So right where they join up, I'm going to go ahead and put a little water on this so that they join properly. Okay, so this looks pretty good. It's all sealed up. Now we get to have some fun with the visuals. It's obvious that they cared about the visuals in here. He even mentions about the paste, you know, being in the shape of a fish. So we're gonna cut this and add some back of the parts that we took out of this. We're going to cut some fins into our paste here. Now our last step before we put this into the oven is just a little bit of egg wash on the top of this so that it gives us a nice brown color. So let's get this washed up here. Okay, that looks very, very good. And this guy's ready to go into the oven. We're gonna put it into the oven in a modern oven, probably 400, 420 degrees or so. The cooking time really depends on the size of your fish. I would say this one's probably going to take about 20 minutes. You'll have to watch it, see how it goes. If it's a much smaller fish, it might not take quite as long. If it's a giant fish, obviously, it's going to take a little bit longer. Let's get this one in the oven. So here's our fish pie after 25 minutes in the oven. Then I let it rest. So about 15 minutes to cool off so I could move it onto this platter. I was having trouble. This guy is long. It's hard to find a platter big enough for this. We're going to cut into this. Now I'm not interested in the head myself, so I'm just going to remove sort of the crust here from the center. We still want it to look nice, right? So we want to carefully remove this crust. So we can just kind of cut into the very bottom of it. Well, it looks like it cooked well. It's got some wonderful smells to it, a nice cooked fish smell. We've got some spices, spice smells coming off of that. Let's see how well our flesh cooked up here. We're gonna get in here and see how well it cooked. Here we go. It's fish pie from 1650. Let's see. Perfect. Very nice. This is really good. Obviously, you got to be careful with bones anytime you're eating a fish like this, but excellent. And you can imagine what this is like. You've put it in this paste here, and it's sort of internally steamed it. So instead of cooking it like a lot of recipes from the 18th century, where you're poaching it, right, and you're kind of mixing it up with all these extra water, and you're pouring away some of the flavor. This traps all this flavor in here, along with the spices and that butter, and really makes a tremendous dish, a great flavor. I imagine that this disappears because it's not the easiest thing to bake. You gotta have a nice big plate, and it's gotta go into an oven and all that, but the flavors are tremendous, and it's such a fun looking dish that I just really, really enjoy this one. And you can do it with a lot of different kinds of fish and probably play this up. You could, do it with freshwater fish, small fish, or large fish. You probably want to find ones that work better with, that don't have too many bones, or that their flesh is nice and out there and really easy to get to, or maybe ones that the flavor would work really well for this. But it's such a fun way to do it, and I think it's one of those ones that we can try, and it's so impressive to look at. Wow, this smells great and it looks great. This is a historic pumpkin soup recipe from 1769. Let's find out how to make it. Welcome to 18th century cooking. So this recipe comes from this cookbook called The Professed Cook by Claremont. This is actually a French cookbook that's translated into the English, and this was done in 1769. So it's an 18th century English from the French cookbook, right? And this is a pumpkin soup recipe. It's kind of long. I'm gonna read parts of it here. Cut your pumpkin in such a manner as you may join it again handsomely. Take out all the seeds and half the flesh. And then he talks about preparing the shell of the pumpkin to receive the soup at the end. And then here he talks about putting the soup together. He says, take your pumpkin pieces, cut into dices, bits of the inside, boil in water to a marmalade. Then add a pint of milk boiled with a bit of butter, sugar, and salt. When you are ready, add 6 yolks of eggs. Put a dried crust of bread in the pumpkin shell, and then pour the milk soup part upon it. Cover it as to make it appear whole, and then serve it to the table. So it's a very interesting looking. He's really taking time to tell us how to serve this, how to make it look, and then how to make this pumpkin soup that goes inside of it. So what we're going to do, instead of sort of taking one pumpkin and hollowing it out and taking half of the flesh from the inside, we're going to go ahead and use one of these nice small pumpkins to create the shell. I'm just going to take the seeds out, set that aside, bake it slightly, and then we're going to use another whole pumpkin to make the soup part of it. So let me get this cut up into dices. Well, there's our diced pumpkin pieces. I'm going to put these into our pot and add enough water. Let's get these kind of flattened out. Add enough water. We don't want to have too much water. We don't want to have a soup that's like too soupy, right? So we're going to add just enough water to cover these, and then I'm going to put these on the fire to boil. We need to get these down into that marmalade state. Okay, our mixture looks really good, nice and kind of thick. Maybe next time I'd try it with slightly less water, but a good thick mixture. And we've got a fix for that anyway. So now we need to add some flavor components to this and thicken it up. We're going to add a little bit of salt here. So I've got some salt. The recipe calls for a bit of butter. I don't know exactly what a bit is to this particular guy, so there's our bit of butter. There we go, bit of butter. Interestingly enough, this is sweetened. A lot of these dishes have sweet and sour kind of mixed together, maybe the way we wouldn't necessarily do it. Now, there are other pumpkin soup recipes. In earlier recipe books, the one I was using last week from 1650, that had a pumpkin soup recipe, and the 1750s Spanish cookbook had a pumpkin soup recipe, and it had honey as a sweetener. So here we're going to add just some sugar to this one, like this recipe calls for. There we go. We don't know exactly how much. Now it calls for some milk, or we could even add cream. So this is sort of like a cream of pumpkin soup. You know, it calls for a pint. I don't want to thin this up too much. So, I mean, it all really depends on how much pumpkin you got, right? So there's that. And now to kind of re-thicken it back up, it calls for adding eggs, the yolks of eggs. Now, I want to add this in while it's still warm, but not so hot that it will cook the eggs, or we have to be really careful about how we bring these in. So I've got the yolks of 6 eggs. Let me warm these up with a little bit of our mixture here and get this going. Okay, one more mix. Okay, now this can go in. This feels like it's just barely cool, a little more cool than I want it to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and just set this back on the fire for a second to thicken this up. I don't wanna overcook this at this point. These eggs, you know, that we just put in, they're meant to thicken it up. And I don't want to overdo that. So I'm going to put this over the fire for just a second. It depends on the temperature of your mixture as it came in here. Well, when you add that milk to it and the other ingredients, if it's still nice and warm, you may not need to warm this back up. But we're going to put this on a very low fire, warm this back up, and then it's ready to go into its pumpkin bowl. So let me get this on the fire. So here's our pumpkin bowl that the recipe talked about at the very beginning, where we cut the top off so that we can put it back on again, just like we do a modern, you know, jack-o'-lantern. You can cut a design in it, which is very, very interesting. Now, they did a thing with sort of like a meringue mixture that they would put in the carvings and then bake it. We tried that. It didn't look like what we thought would be very interesting, so we just put some simple carvings on this one. You could probably have a lot of fun with decorating this pumpkin, right? And that's one of the great parts about this. It's got a it has a very fun presentation. So we cut this top off. This one we just scooped out the innards and we baked it a little bit so that it's kind of ready to go. And now what we can do here, the recipe calls for a bit of bread in the bottom. All these recipes, all these French recipes for soup all call for bread in the bottom of your soup. It's just part of how it was done, right? So we're gonna go ahead and slice a piece of bread here and put it in the bottom of this pumpkin bowl. And there's a nice bit. We can break it up a little bit because that way it'll fit better. But this will thicken it up and it gives you something to sort of bite into at the bottom, something to, dig in there and try to find and thicken it up. So now that that's there, we can go ahead and pour our mixture in. It's nice and warm now. And now this is ready to go to the table. It's ready to serve. Well, we can put our little lid on, or maybe we can leave the lid right beside it, but we can put a spoon in it and it's ready to go to the table. Ah, there we go. Looks good, smells good. Wait, it's missing one thing, I think. Even though the recipe didn't call for it, some of the other ones similar to it called for a little bit of nutmeg. There we go. Let me mix that in. Now it's ready. Now it's ready. Let's find out what this one tastes like. Whoa. Hey. Wow. So we did a preliminary one. I like to test these things out. And this one's much better. Really turned out great. Nice and thick and has some wonderful flavors in there. Nutmeg not being the least there. It's really good. We've got some nice bread here to thicken it up. And I think putting it back on the fire to thicken up just a touch really worked well. It's still got enough of that pumpkin kind of solidity of it, that it isn't just broken down into a pure puree, which you can do, and some of the recipes actually call for pushing this pumpkin mixture through a sieve so that it was perfectly smooth. I kind of like it with a little bit of its texture left in it. So, but the egg and the milk kind of almost gives you a little bit of a like a custardy, flavor to it. But the pumpkin certainly isn't lost in the least. So it's got some really good, fun flavors in it. And again, this is 18th century French, very, very similar to some of the other recipes like the Spanish recipe. And you'll see these pumpkin recipes also show up in North America. Not as much. I went looking in the English cookbooks, didn't find anything quite like this, other than this cookbook itself. This is The Professed Cook, and it was translated from the French into the English in the 18th century. So it's a kind of a recipe book that, someone well-to-do in Great Britain would have access to. They'd have this kind of a cookbook that they could purchase. This was 1769, so right there in the middle of the 18th century. Man, I'm going to eat this whole thing. Really, really good. Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm John Townsend, and today we'll be going into some 18th century Spanish cooking. We'll be doing a poached salmon. Thanks for joining us today. For the next few episodes, we'll be concentrating on recipes that are not necessarily British cooking. So a lot of what we've done in the past is specifically English cooking or British cookery. It's very easy to research. There are lots and lots of English cookbooks, and so we've been doing a lot of that, along with some other cookery. But for these next few episodes, we'll be looking at some other cultures, specifically Spanish, French, Swedish, hopefully, and Native American recipes or dishes. Today, we'll be doing a couple of recipes out of The New Art of Cookery by Juan Altamires, and this was printed in about 1750. This book is a reinterpretation or, let's say, translation by Vicky Hayward. Excellent book. Let's get started. So let me read to you this translation of Altomiras's recipe. This was just salmon. He says, fresh salmon is best boiled and served with a little fresh olive oil and sharp citrus juice or fried onion and salt. Salted salmon needs soaking in clean running water for a full day and a night like tuna, then scoured with new esparto grass before cooking. Such cleanliness, though learned not natural, is enough to make you a fine cook. Serve this salmon with a dusting of pepper and a jug of fresh olive oil. Very, very interesting recipe for what it's got there and what it doesn't have there. And of course, we'll be using fresh salmon, not the salted salmon, which I'm not sure where I would get salted salmon from these days, but that in the time period was the inexpensive alternative to fresh salmon. This recipe, we're going to start off with the onions. This one's pretty simple. We're going to take about a pound of onions, cut them nice and fine, and these are going to go into a pan with 4 tablespoons of olive oil. Now, this is meant to cook very slowly over a very low fire. So I've picked here a cast iron pan to cook these in because I want something that I can control the heat with. If I had a nice thin pan, boy, it can get hot or cold very, very rapidly, so I want something with a lot of body to it. In the time period, they may have used, say, a ceramic pot or a ceramic kind of pan that would cook these very slowly. So we're gonna brown these onions, actually not brown them, but very slowly fry them for about an hour. So about halfway through here, I've added some saffron water and some salt and pepper. So what's happening here is it's like kind of boiling off the water that's in the onions and kind of cooking that off. And now I'm going to add a little bit more water back in with the saffron water and let it cook for another half hour. Very, very low, very slow, and stirring it so that it doesn't burn. So my onions are still cooking. They're gently cooking. I'm going to keep my eye on them and keep them stirring. Now we can start the next part of this recipe, which has to do with the salmon. Now I've already got some pre-prepared, cut up, beautiful salmon steaks that we're going to be cooking. Now he just says boil them. Of course, in other parts of the cookbook, he actually kind of goes into more depth about cooking fish, and he references boiling these very gently. That's one of the tricks with these old recipe books, is that their vocabulary wasn't as big for cooking as we have today. And we will, of course, poach these salmon steaks. He just used boil. They probably would have understood it in the time period as a very gentle simmer. Now, many times in these cookbooks or in these situations in 18th century cooking, if they wanted to cook something very gently, they would actually use a ceramic vessel. They had all kinds of different kinds of cooking vessels, and something that's very common in the 18th century for English cooking and especially for French and other continental cooking is to use a ceramic vessel for cooking things very gently, very slowly. So we're gonna actually poach our salmon in this clay cooking pot today. So I've got my pot, my ceramic pot here on the low fire, and I just let it heat up just a little bit. If we put this on a fire without having anything in it, it'll probably bust and crack. These kinds of things are really meant to be heated very evenly. So once this kind of gets up to a simmer, since I poured boiling water into it, once it comes back up into a simmer, I'm going to slip the fish in here and get it cooking. So while our fish is poaching, let me tell you a little bit more about this particular cookbook and why I find it so very, very interesting. So published about right there about 1750 or so. And the very, very interesting thing, beyond the fact that this is Spanish cooking, and there are these very, very interesting similarities and differences between English cookery and Spanish cookery at the time period, the interesting thing about this cookbook is that this author doesn't just pick out the high-end cookery, which is very easy to find in cookbooks, especially say earlier 17th century cookbooks. Those were generally court cookery, or cookbooks for people with a lot of money, and so they would have fancy cooking in it. This particular cookbook by this friar is full of things that were let's say, of modest means. So inexpensive cookery, and those can be very difficult to find. So it's got a different glimpse into cookery than we might find in a lot of different period cookbooks. Excellent, excellent book. And this particular author, this modern author who reinterprets these things, does a really good job of connecting them with modern Spanish cookery. It might not be perfect if you're trying to understand exactly what it was like in the 18th century, but when we try to incorporate these into our modern palate, she does such an excellent job. So excellent, excellent cookbook. Well, there's our salmon on top of our bed of onions. Looks wonderful. I've got a little bit of lemon here. I mean, he talks about several different ways that you could actually serve this with just fresh olive oil and a little bit of lemon, or serve it on this bed of onions. And we've got a little bit of parsley here, which was mentioned in the recipe. Let's give this a try, see how it turned out. Let's see here. Whoop. Boy, that is tremendous. The onions are just really good with this fish. What a wonderful combination of these wonderful sweet onions, this really interesting texture on the onions. They're so softly, gently cooked, and they've got a little bit of spice in there, the pepper. You could add a little bit of garlic to it or whatever that's in some of these recipes. Along with this gently cooked fish, which is so wonderful and tender and isn't, fishy flavored in the least, especially the way this was cooked, gently poached. So it's a great combination of flavors.
Locust Grove, September 8th, 1825. Dear General, your letter of the 15th of the month was received by me last week. I have not heard from my mother since her arrival at Pittsburgh. Inform her that everything goes on here exceedingly well. The women have dried a great deal of fruit and are at their houses spinning wool or cotton or something of that kind. Old Nanny officiates for me in the cooking department. 2 churns are going daily, and Alfred goes to market almost every day and gives the profits to Laraway. I got some white Havana sugar and made some peach preserves, about 2 pounds, I suppose, and with all due deference to my mother's knowledge on this subject, I think they excel that of her make. I would like to send one of the jars to Anne. I shall keep a pound or so against my mother's return, and send the remainder to Serena. Request Charles and all of them to write to me directly in Louisville. If I am not here, the letter will be forwarded. I have not heard from George for a long time, but I am told Orleans is healthy. Yours truly, Dr. John Cron.
So we're here at historic Locust Grove here in Louisville, Kentucky, and what you just heard was part of a letter from John Cron, right? And to his mother? Is he talking to his mother or his brother?
Yes, so John Cron was actually writing to his brother-in-law, Thomas Jessup, who was a general who lived in Washington City, or Washington, D.C., as we refer to it now, with John's brother Anne. So this letter is actually written in 1825, which is after John's father had passed away. So at that time, his mother was actually going and living with her children in places like Pittsburgh or in Washington.
So this particular letter was written in
1825.
1825.
Yes, this was written September 8th, 1825.
And we just heard a little piece of the letter, right?
It's a much longer letter. This family really kept up with each other, and it's wonderful because they tell each other all these little details about their lives and give us this window into it.
Right. So we get to find out what this estate was like in 1825 in this particular letter. Now, we've got preserves mentioned in this letter.
So I love this letter, and I absolutely love John Cron. His letters are so entertaining, but he does sort of put out this challenge and say, my preserves are better than my mother's preserves. So we're going to actually do a taste test today.
Okay.
We've got some preserves here, first of all, that come from Amelia Simmons. So this is
1796.
96. This is right when his mother had moved in here and
Right.
was the lady of the house. So this
Right.
is from Mom's time. Now these are made with using brandy. They're preserved in brandy.
Oh yeah, they're preserved in brandy, all right. Now this hasn't gotten real mushy yet.
No.
Probably these are pretty fresh, right?
Yeah, we made these recently because we're about at that time.
Right.
So there's certain peaches that actually you do harvest in the fall that are intended for preserving. So we've just set these in, and they would keep for 6 months to a
Right.
year.
But they aren't terribly sweet.
No, that wasn't what these peaches were made
Right.
for.
They're-
The peaches that are sweeter that you use for pies and jams really came in the spring.
Right, and the brandy is kind of heavy in this, so there's a lot of brandy flavor. There's some definite peach flavor there, but not what we would consider
Not what we're used to.
peach preserves. Yeah, so but we're going to be doing
We're going to compare this with a recipe from Mary Randolph from the
Right.
Virginia housewife from 1824.
which is exactly this time frame.
Exactly.
And this one's going to be a good bit different. How do we get started? Well, we'll try out this recipe after when we're done with it. How do we get started on the Mary Randolph recipe?
So Mary Randolph, we're going to start. There's no brandy in this one. We're just going to start by paring our peaches.
Okay.
So grab a knife
Okay.
and we're start paring them,
Okay.
and then we'll slice them. All right, now once you've pared a peach, there is actually a trick to slicing this.
Right.
So what you're going to do is you've pared your peach. You're going to find the natural crease in the peach and slice around. And then first you're going to quarter it. And then I'm going to do this in eighths. So I've gone around 4 times. Once I'm done, then we come around the center. So we've actually sliced the peach on the pit, and then we twist. And
Ta-da, right there it
ta-da! All the
Okay.
pieces come off. Some of them you have to still pull off of the pit, but still the easiest way. Now, one thing I will say for Lucy Cron's day is that the recipe from Amelia Simmons actually has you blanch the peaches first, which does make this a little bit easier.
Right. So we've got these guys paired. What's the next step? Or
All right, so we're supposed to take the same weight of the peaches, and we have 2 pounds of peaches here,
Okay.
in sugar, and so 2 pounds of sugar. And we talked about this is one of the big differences between the 1796 recipe and the 1824 recipe.
so how do we do this one?
First, we're just going to put a little bit on. What I have found works the best is actually not to put all that sugar on at first. So we're going to actually just toss these peaches in the bowl, make sure that they're covered in sugar. I might add a little bit more here. She has you have these sit for 2 to 3 hours. So what I found works best is to keep coming back through that time. What's going to happen is the peaches and the sugar are going to start creating this wonderful syrup. And so we're going to just keep coming back and adding more sugar and sort of tossing it up.
Right.
And then we'll create this wonderful syrup that's going to preserve these peaches.
So while this is kind of doing its thing, right, making its own syrup,
Yeah.
we need to come back to this over and over again.
Yeah.
While that's doing that thing,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about this letter and who's actually doing the cooking.
Right. So I said this is one of my favorite letters. I love this letter for so many reasons. It really shows us the different levels of the hierarchy here at Locust Grove. So John talks in this letter, he says, "Old Nanny officiates for me in the kitchen." Nan was an enslaved woman here at Locust Grove. He says old Nanny to his brother-in-law, so we kind of have extrapolated from that. Okay, she was probably here for a long time,
Right.
probably here when the kids grew up. She might have been their nurse.
Okay.
But this is why we know the name of the woman who actually did most of the cooking and the work in this kitchen. So everything we're looking at here today is what Nan was doing.
Right.
And
Right. So even though John says my preserves,
Right.
he actually means preserves made
by
here.
Nan, yeah. And I love John so much. I love his personality, but I look at this letter and I say, wow, John, in one sentence, when you say my preserves, you have challenged your mother
Right.
and ignored the work of this woman.
Right.
But I mean, like you say, I understand. He thought he was the master of the house. this was his.
Yeah.
But we love it because it just shows us so many of the people who were here at Locust Grove, as well as the crops they were preserving, with the food they were making. It's such a lovely slice of life.
Right. He couldn't have done better to tell us what was happening in his day.
Yeah.
Even if he was like, hey, 200 years later, this is what was happening.
Right.
This has been sort of percolating here for 10 or 20 minutes, and it definitely is starting to pull some of that moisture out. Now we need to...
Just keep adding the sugar. You can see it's already got this lovely syrup forming, and we're just going to keep putting that sugar in there.
And that'll just keep pulling the moisture out. Good. So these have set for what, an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah.
They're nice and gooey. So what's the next step?
So we can definitely see by now what a 1:1 sugar to peach ratio gets you.
Yeah.
So now,
diabetes.
yes. Well, people burned a lot more calories.
Right, exactly.
At the time, we're just going to ladle them into our pan. You want to use a pot that's not too deep.
Okay.
And in fact, that's actually probably about as much as I would do in one go right there. We can put in another batch if we want to. And then we've got what is actually almost too thick at this point. So we're going to add a little bit of water.
Okay.
Not too much.
And it calls for adding water?
It says to add a little bit of water, and then we're going to put it over the fire.
I like those precise measurements.
You know, enough.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And just put it over till, quote, thoroughly scalded.
Thoroughly scalded, whatever that might mean. I mean, I think scalded, I think just flash hot, but obviously that can't be true here.
Well,
we have to get everything hot here.
We're going to get it hot and then cook it down a little bit again to a syrup.
Do we cook it down? Is that what it says?
It's you're absolutely right. It says to put it down until thoroughly scalded. Take them out with the ladle, draining off the syrup is the next instruction.
Because, I mean, when I think about this, I think the whole process here is really just to kill off the bugs.
That's true.
Right? So we're not seemingly trying to cook the peaches as much as just getting them hot enough to make sure that it's killing everything off.
You're right.
That would be my guess.
No, you're absolutely right. But what's really happening is that we have to make sure that we cook down whatever water we've put in here again, so that we do end up with a really nice syrup for preserving these in.
Okay. Off they go, onto the fire.
And here we are over the fire. It really is eyeballing it, you know, looking at it, making sure the syrup looks good. She does say that if you don't have enough syrup, you can put it back in with more water and do it again. You can add more or less water, really until it just looks like you say you've taken off the bugs before you preserve it. You've got a good syrup, but the key is you have to make sure that you have enough syrup to cover the peaches, but it really doesn't take as much syrup as you think. They're going to pack
so we're gonna have
down
leftover
into
fine.
that. I've found that's not running out of syrup is not usually the problem. Now that these have been thoroughly scalded, we take them off the fire and let them cool for a moment. Then next, we're going to gently scoop the fruit into the jar. And then we're going to cover that up with some of this wonderful syrup we've created here.
And we want that syrup to come all the way up over the top, probably?
We do want that now. The peaches will try to float in the syrup, so at some point you do need
Gonna have to give up on it.
to sort of, and you can push a
there
couple
they
in
go.
there, and there they go.
Okay, so we've got our little lid here, but that probably isn't the best way to seal. Now today we would, put this in a glass
hot
jar,
bath
a hot bath, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
What is her description here?
Mary Randolph does have a solution for this, and you're right, the lid is lovely, but that's not what she recommends. She actually tells you that once you've put your preserves into your receptacle, put letter paper wet with brandy on the preserves and cover the tops with many folds of soft paper that will tie around closely.
So what she's doing is cutting a piece of paper the size of this on the inside. She's brandying it and laying that on. Now, that's sort of similar to the idea of, pouring like paraffin on the top. Or,
Exactly. It's creating a seal with something that's antiseptic.
Right.
So in Amelia Simmons' recipe, that wasn't necessary because they're just covered
They
in
are brandy. Yeah. Can't go wrong there.
Well, and now we see Amelia Simmons used a little sugar, lots of brandy. Now we're using lots of sugar and a little bit of brandy just to provide that seal.
Right. And so we would put that little brandy paper on there, let that sort of seal the air from the top, and then we would put this lid on and then cover it with paper
and tie it up,
right.
and then store it somewhere that's dry and
Cool
safe.
and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So now it's time to try this one. This one you made earlier, right?
Yes, these are some preserves we did before.
Okay, so what have we got here? You got one of the seeds right up on top.
We do, actually, yes. Our last batch, we were able to get a few of these actual seeds out of the pit. All right. And she just did, Mary Randolph included that as a sort of extra, hey, if you want to, you could include this.
Right, and I've never really heard about seeds stored in sugar syrup before, so that I
Waste
thought that
not,
was
want
interesting.
not. There's another one.
Look at that.
Here we go. All right, John,
Okay,
you are the judge here.
I gotta test it. And
Let's see, who
let's find
gets
out.
better bragging rights.
Well, that is a lot like
Yeah.
what you're gonna find at the store today. Let me go back and try one of these again. They're completely different animals. Just day and night difference.
So I wonder if maybe John's bragging actually spoke to changing tastes.
Changing tastes or, again now, but we're just trying them out of the jar.
That's true.
Now, they may have eaten them just out of the jar, but you could also, I think these might work better in a pie than those. I don't know.
Though those are almost practically, you wouldn't have to cook that very much, especially after it sat there longer.
Right, and we definitely have something going on here between these 18th century, and this is a typical 18th century style of preservation, and then this is happening in this 19th century time period, and there's a good reason for that, I believe. Probably sugar becomes a lot less expensive.
Yeah.
Possibly brandy gets more expensive. It's hard to say.
So who won?
I don't know. I mean, if they're two different monsters completely.
Yeah.
This is what you would get today if you opened up a can of peaches. Those are good. Those are great. These are something different.
And I think we see it morphing here more into the kinds of foods that we're used to today.
Right.
So I wonder if John's bragging was partly just based on his being part of a different generation than his mother.
All right. I think if I wanted to serve something different to people, and I wanted to say, 18th century cooking, it's the same, but it's different.
Yeah.
This would be the thing I would choose to show them as an example of that, rather than, hey, this is the birth of the modern preserved peach that we're used
Absolutely. And I think today we might come at something like this as a special dessert rather than a method of preservation. I know I've been at dinner at people's houses where they say, oh, let's take some fresh peaches and pour brandy on it. It's just a very different mentality.
And light it on fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Today we're at historic Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky. We'll be doing a special, this is a very special on-site episode today. I've got with me Brian Cushing. He's a program director here at this site, and our guest distiller is Alan Bishop, and he'll be directing the episode today. And what are we going to be making?
So we're going to be making historic Applejack style brandy is what we're going to be making today.
Apple brandy. So step number one, how do we get started?
Got to mash some apples.
So we're going to get started mashing some apples. So tell me about the mashing process versus grinding and why we're doing it with a stick, etc.
Yes, sir. So most of the early distilleries, especially the farm distilleries or even the smaller industrial style distilleries, they would have relied on as much of the primitive technologies as what they could, because they A, didn't have a lot of money to buy specialty tools, but B, on top of that, the distilling portion of what they did was secondary. It was ancillary to the farm work. So they're going to get away with putting as little into it as what they possibly could. So on the bottom end of the farm distilleries, you have this basic methodology, using a stick to break up apples. But then you can have anything up to a small apple grinder Or the people that had a little more money might even have like a nut mill or something of that nature with which they could grind their apples with. You might be familiar with modern apple brandy made from apple juice, obviously tying into apple cider. And you can make brandy that way. The style of brandy that we're going to be making today is actually what they call apple mash brandy. And the reason for the mashing over the cider is that you have a limited amount of time to work with when you're creating your brandy, and it takes 1 to 3 bushels of apples to make 1 gallon of brandy. So obviously much easier, much more efficient as far as the farm workers go to grind those apples up. And
so the real difference here is whether or not we squeeze those apples out or actually throw the apples and everything into the still, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
okay,
sir.
so this Applejack style is like, hey, we're going to get this fermenting. We're going to let all this stuff stay. We're not going to strain it out. We're going to toss it all in the pot, right?
That's
so
correct.
that's the real difference.
Yep. And the big thing about that is too that in that time period, so the apple mash cider, the Applejack that was made, was actually considered a higher quality than general apple brandy because you're actually in contact in the fermentation vessel with all the skin, all the things that make an apple an apple.
All the solids and everything.
You're extracting even more of the flavor of that apple.
Okay.
So brandy distillation is really about the concentration of the aromatics, okay? So the more of that you can hold on to, the more aroma you get, the more flavor you subsequently get. So with this apple mash brandy, it puts all those elements of the apple in contact with the yeast, which is going to convert sugar into ethanol. And subsequently, you're going to get more of the flavor of the apple from this type of mashing than you would from a juice.
So the more mashing though we get, the finer those particles are, the more it can work on it, the more flavors we extract. That's why we might want a real fine grind as much as possible.
Yes, exactly.
So Alan, these apples are all chopped up. They're nice and fine. What's our next step?
So our next step is we're going to come over here to our boiler. This is a 60-gallon copper boiler. And what we're going to do is we're going to boil some water, and we're going to use...
Obviously we got this boiling, so...
Yep, we're going to use that water then to cook the apples in, essentially. So
how are we going to do that?
So we're going to pour the water directly over top of the apples, and that's going to begin that cooking process, breaking down those cell walls, releasing all those sugars, and breaking down whatever starch is maybe left in that apple from storage. And at the same time, it's going to kill off any microorganisms that might otherwise interfere with our fermentation process. Of course, in the early days, those guys didn't know a whole lot about that.
Right. They just knew the best way to do it was this way.
Yeah, they didn't know how or why things worked. They knew how they worked. So just like our copper boiler, the reason that they used the copper was because it was reactive. So they knew that it would heat up faster than anything else that they had. The other thing it does is it captures different types of sulfur compounds, and it cleans up the water. It subsequently cleans up the fermentation, and the same reason that stills were made out of copper as well. So they would have noticed those reactions over time, but maybe not known why. So we are attempting to drop our temperature down to about 90 degrees. So that's where yeast likes to be happy at. And again, back in those days, most of the farmer distillers wouldn't have had a thermometer to check with. So it all would have been done by hand. So we are at about 90 degrees now, and we're going to pitch our yeast and begin the process of converting all those sugars.
How are they going to know what temperature that is?
Well, the yeast themselves, they talk amongst one another,
right?
And they have an idea. They go, "It's a little warm," It's like taking a bath.
Well, I mean, how are we going to find out what temperature?
How are we going to find out?
Period?
In that time period, essentially, you're just going to check it and make sure that it's nice and lukewarm. You don't want it overly warm. Pretty close to obviously your own body temperature.
Right. So 90, we want this a little less than blood warm, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yep. So once we pitch the yeast, that's going to kick off the process of fermentation. We're going to start converting all that sugar into ethanol and then also CO2. In a couple days, you're going to start seeing bubbles form and a cap form. Once the fermentation is done, two things you're going to notice is you'll be able to taste it, and you won't taste any of that sweetness anymore. And the other thing is when you pull your finger back out, you pull it out now, you can tell it's sticky. There's sugar there.
Right.
When it's finished, that sugar is not going to be there.
Right.
So the yeast
it doesn't taste sweet because it's all that sugar's
it's all
gone.
been fermented. Yes. So the yeast that we're actually going to use is very particular to this style of brandy. So this is actually a yeast that comes from a distillery in southern Indiana called the McCoy Distillery. And that distillery made specifically Applejack brandy. That's all they made, Applejack and peach brandy.
Tell me how you got this yeast.
So we harvested this yeast. That distillery is the only distillery I know of in southern Indiana from those farm distillers that actually still has a building remaining, original wood and everything. So we made the equivalent of our mash here, and we set that around various locations in that old distillery. After 24 hours, we noticed that we had yeast working. All 4 of those samples fermented around the same time. They all smelled the same and they all tasted the same. So we presumed that they were all 4 the same or a very similar yeast that was dedicated to the production of alcohol.
Right.
So that yeast can live in that wood for hundreds of years. And pretty proud and pretty happy to have this particular yeast to put back into work in this style of brandy production.
Okay. So that's what you've got. You're going to add to this.
Yes, sir. Yep.
So let's pitch it.
All right. So that's as simple as it sounds. We're just going to open our jug up and pour in. So I should also mention that depending on how involved those early distillers were, they may or may not have cultured their own yeast. We know the McCoys did because they had their own yeast jug. And the yeast jug was basically a way of propagating your yeast and maintaining it and keeping it. And generally they would keep 2 around. They would have one that traveled back and forth to and from the distillery from work with the distiller, and a second one that they would usually put somewhere like in a well where it was closed up so it would stay cold and no air would get to it, and they'd have it as a backup in case they ever lost their original strain. So what's going to happen now is this is going to work off in 6 to 7 days, essentially converting all that sugar to alcohol. After that 6 to 7 day period and we get this down to where there's no sugars left, we're going to take it and we're actually going to bucket brigade that into the still.
So this goes in the mash, the apple bits, everything goes straight into this.
Yes, sir. Yep. In the early days when they didn't have mechanized agitation in the still, you'd actually bucket into the still and you'd have somebody stirring inside the still until it got up to boiling. The other thing they often did is they would line the bottom of the still with straw. And what that does is it puts a layer in and keeps this from burning to the bottom of the still. So we would go into the still and do that double pot still distillation process. So when we're talking about that, what we're doing is essentially the first run on the still is we're bringing the temperature up to 172.3 degrees. Alcohol vapor rises, comes up to the cap and across the line arm, and over here out the worm. We're not doing anything to it to change it whatsoever, just capturing all the alcohol we can at about 50 to 60 proof roughly. We're going to capture all that and go back into the still, put that back into the still, 172.3 degrees, and we're going to make our cuts. So the first thing that's going to come off is going to be 4 shots. Almost all methanol. Second piece is going to be heads, so it's going to be like acetaldehyde, ethyl acetate. Smells a little like fingernail polish remover. We'll hold on to that, and that might get rerun into another batch later on because it doesn't accumulate over time. And then we're going to have our hearts, which is going to be what we actually want to drink, sell or trade. And then at about 90 proof to about 20, we're going to have our tails, where you have more water than you do ethanol. And it begins to get a little bit vegetative in flavor. Still good alcohol. We're going to save that, and that'll go into the next batch that we distill again to rectify it even more.
Brian Cushing has come all the way up from Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky with the finished product so we can try it out and see the stages we've got. Thanks for coming up, Brian.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
So what have we got here? You got a bunch of different bottles.
Yes. So since we can't actually distill on site, we went through the whole mashing process correctly in the video and all that, so it was ready to go. But since we're not a licensed distiller ourselves, we can't finish it out. So our one of our sponsors, a Kentucky Artisan Distillery in Crestwood, Kentucky, was kind enough to take the mash up to their facility and finish it out as kind of a research project for us. So they did the fermentation, they did the distillation, and even though they were using some modern equipment, they kept it as pure as they possibly could.
Same as what would have been done in the time period.
Right.
So you've got multiple things here. These are the stages.
Right. So this is all the different. These are the different cuts, and we've got a few different cuts here. We've got 2 of heads. And this is the toxic stuff. So that's the stuff you don't want to drink. And like Alan said in the video, I think, depending on how good the distiller was in the early 19th century, they might have cut this out or not. So this is not the stuff you want to consume. These are the hearts. This is the good stuff. And these are the tails. This stuff isn't going to hurt you, but it's also not, it doesn't taste that great either. So depending on the skill of the distiller, they might leave some of this in for some character, but not too much where it's going to throw it bad.
And maybe mix some of these in either to, fill up the fill up the barrel or cut it out if it's the good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this ideally, this might be redistilled later in a different batch, but hopefully, if you do your job right, it's not going into the final, into what you're actually going to drink. That's a headache waiting to happen.
Right. Okay, here's the finished product. Let's try this out. It does have a nice fruity aromatic to it right off the bat. So let's find out what it tastes like. I was expecting just a white liquor, just alcohol,
Right.
but there's a lot more here.
Absolutely.
than
I was
that.
surprised. I really was when we got to
Right.
try it.
There are a lot of different flavors there, and I wasn't going to guess that I was going to get any apple out of this, really, but there is a apple aroma and some apple flavor there that's left in it. It's very mellow for something that's not aged. It's
Right.
wow.
Well, this was, Alan's skill in the mashing, the orchard that helped us out with the apples, Kentucky Artisan Distilleries, their skill doing the distillation. And we all kind of got together and talked about it to kind of wrap up the research on this. A couple of the factors that we figured played into that were the solids being left in while they distilled it, just
Right.
like they would have been 200 years ago. And then the wine sap apples, especially that the orchard
particular
managed to get in there for us. And they got us a great selection of apples for this.
That is tremendous. We're here at historic Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky, and I've got Amy Liebert. And what are we cooking today?
All right, so today we are going to be cooking a very simple recipe, one of my favorite recipes, and that is peas porridge.
Pease porridge, and this is out of...
Why, this is out of one of my favorite cookbooks, Primitive Cookery, or The Kitchen Garden Displayed, which I got from Townsends.
Yeah. So, this one seems pretty simple, probably. How do we get started with it?
Well, this recipe is very simple. We start with a quart of green peas, which we have.
Right.
We will put them in this pot with a quart of water, a bundle of dried mint, which we have there, and a little salt.
Okay, so we're not going to make the whole batch, right?
We could probably do about half.
But the important part here is the ratio.
Yeah, 2 to 1, or 1 to 1.
And this recipe, it doesn't actually say exactly what kind of peas. We have to interpret this recipe. There are multiple green peas recipes. I thought that was kind of funny. This thing's got, 5, 6 recipes for peas porridge. This is just one of the simple ones. We have to read into it what kind of peas to use because of the way it's cooked. We're going to use split peas, or you could use whole dried green peas. We're going to do a half size one. There is a pint of peas. And you got about a pint of water.
We did a 1-1, so we just measured out the same amount.
And what else needs to go in here?
We are going to use a little salt.
A little salt and
our bundle of dried mint that came from our garden here at Locust Grove.
dried mint. Yes, definitely. And we just toss this in.
Toss it in.
Okay.
We should really put a little twine on that if we were being really careful, and then we could fish it out.
Yeah, we got the big long stem.
Well, the thing is, if a little bit of dried mint ends up in your porridge, we put dried mint in all kinds of soups and things today.
Exactly.
So it's going to work out very well.
But they would put the bundle in there if they wouldn't want twigs in there.
No,
But
but
this
those
is
will
easy
come
to
out
come out. Okay, so
pretty
this just
easily.
goes over the fire.
We're going to let that boil till the peas are quite tender, and then we will add the rest of our ingredients.
Okay. So these peas have been on how long?
Oh, what was that, about 20 minutes? Half
20?
hour?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Looks like they're ready to come off.
I'm gonna pull this forward, bring it up here.
Good.
All right. Let's see.
So we take out the mint, right?
We're going to take out that mint.
Right.
All right. We are going to put in a piece of butter the size of a walnut, right about here, that we've rolled in flour.
Right. And you'll see that happen in a lot of different recipes where they want this certain amount of flour, not too much. It's very similar to a roux that we might do today, but it's a real quick and simple way to get just the right amount of butter.
Yeah, and it's adding as a thickening agent as well.
Flour, yeah.
All right, so
So
we're
that-
going to
that
put
goes in,
that
right?
in with
Right.
some beaten pepper.
So good. We're using ground pepper. I like
Absolutely.
pepper. You can. Yep, that's
You add
good.
a little more.
Yeah, just for me.
Hey, you're going to be the one eating it, so
Okay.
make it to taste. And we can see our butter is already melting in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to, you can see most of the liquids come out of here.
And how much butter or how much milk do we want here?
It is a 2-to-1 ratio.
Right. So Is there
About
a quart
half
here?
of that.
About
That
half
was
of
2
this.
quarts, and
Okay.
we're doing a half.
And we can adjust this.
Exactly.
It's our food. We get to do whatever we want. It doesn't matter what the recipe says.
And you know, we were talking about this while it was cooking. I've never had to think about it this much. I make this out here. I add a
Right.
little water if it needs some water.
Yeah, but it was just like cooking in the day. They adjusted these things as they needed to. Maybe their peas absorbed more water. Maybe they didn't. So
Exactly.
Right.
That's why so many of these recipes say cook until done. But this one does specify another 15 minutes with the milk.
okay, so this goes back on the fire.
It goes back on the fire. We'll thicken up nicely.
So our porridge has been on the fire for what? Half an hour.
About half an hour, yeah.
Okay, so let's take it off. That's longer than it called for, but that's okay.
You know, the nice thing about this recipe is that it's so versatile. We did end up boiling it longer and or simmering it and adding some more milk, and it's fairly difficult to kill.
Yeah,
And it smells so good.
it does.
And this is really good and sustaining. And it is so simple.
Now, it's green.
It
And
is.
it might not look all that appetizing, but when she says it smells really good, she's not kidding. It does smell wonderful. And of course, we might add ham to this or something, but well, let's try it out. Wow. Really warm on a nice cold day like today. A wonderful thing.
It's wonderful.
And this one is so simple. You can cook
Yeah.
this one in camp.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this in the big fancy kitchen here today, but I've done this over a fire. It's so easy, especially when you're doing cooking demonstrations and you're talking to the public and you can't necessarily always be focused on the pot. It's so easy, and people always get such a kick out of it because it's peas porridge, and they've all heard the rhyme about peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold. Now, I don't know about 9 days old, but I can tell you it will keep thickening over the next couple days. If you keep it, it just gets better and better.
Well, and probably by 9 days, you can slice it up and fry it like mush, and it'd be really good. I'm not kidding. No, this has got some
And especially for people who do reenacting, who are looking for simple meals that you can cook in camp, especially half of these are dry ingredients. This really is great, and you can get all the ingredients for this at your local grocery store.
right. And I imagine that you could do it without, if you only had water.
Oh, yeah.
It would still work out. It would be much plainer.
No, but it would still work.
If you've got salt and pepper, you've got your peas, you've got some water. It's a common provision that soldiers would have.
Absolutely.
On board ship, dried peas, common. Again, it's something that shows up over and over again in the journals and in different sorts of listings of supplies that people would have in the 18th century. And we can find it today, and it's really, really good. So we're at Historic Locust Grove. Amy, tell us about the site.
The site itself began construction in 1792. Normally, we interpret from about 1806 to 1822. For our trades impressions, we usually center around about 1810 to 1820. So you can see the clothes I'm wearing about in that time period right there. You can come for a tour 7 days a week, except in January. The site does close. And if you're interested in seeing demonstrations like this one, call ahead and ask when the next one will be.
Yeah, so if you're in this Louisville area here in Kentucky, wonderful site. Make sure to check it out. We'll make sure to put a link down in the description section so you can find their website. I want to thank you guys for coming along today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Finally, at long last, we're doing a duck recipe. This one's from 1773. Thanks for joining us today. The English recipe books from the 18th century are chock full of poultry and game bird recipes. Duck shows up a lot here. So we're going to be doing a duck recipe. This one's from the Universal Cook by John Townsend in 1773. And it says you can do this with duck, you can do it with widgeon or teal. Who knows what kind of bird you brought down that you want to cook up. Now, today we're going to be using a modern duck, a commercial duck, as it were. And they actually call this thing a duckling. It's huge. It's probably the size of a goose in the 18th century. Today we would probably say, oh, we're gonna roast this duck, something like that, because our modern ducks are lots of meat here, and we can get away with roasting them. You don't see ducks being roasted too much in the 18th century because they're small and probably tough. So stewing is the way you're going to be cooking a duck in the 18th century. So we're gonna prep this duck just like that. We're gonna stew him. If you're following along at home, here are the ingredients we're going to need. We're gonna use a duck here. If you don't have a duck, you could probably use a chicken. I'm not sure exactly how it would turn out here, but a duck is what we're gonna be using today. We've got some ground salt and pepper, a few whole cloves. We don't need too many. We're going to need a couple of ounces of butter to put inside the bird that's cooking. We also have a couple of shallots and a bundle of sweet herbs. So rosemary, we've got some mint here, some tarragon, a little bit of basil. There's some sweet herbs, and then we're going to, since this is stewing, we're gonna need liquids. So we've got some red wine, some good strong gravy, or in this case, I'm using bone broth, and then water. Let's start to assemble this. We've got our duck, and we're gonna put it inside of a vessel that we can have a nice tight lid on. And I'm gonna be using this camp kettle or Dutch oven. They would have used a ceramic vessel with a tight fitting lid. I don't have one that's big enough for this. We wanna have one that is just the right size, not too big so that we have to fill this up with liquid. So this Dutch oven is gonna work out right. It says to put these shallots in. We've also got this butter that goes into the body or the internal cavity here. Let's put some salt on the outside of this guy. There we go. I'm gonna pat this with salt and with pepper. And we're gonna use ground pepper here. Put that on our bird. It calls for a couple of whole cloves, so we're going to toss those down into the bottom along with our bundle of sweet herbs. We're just going to put those into the side. Again, those are just here while it's cooking. They'll be taken out when it's time to serve it. Now comes now the recipe calls for half a pint of claret, a nice red wine. I'm going to use a little bit more than that because this is a large bird and a larger vessel here. So there's our wine. And the recipe calls for a gravy. And gravy in the 18th century can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it just means the drippings or the juice that comes out of meat while it's cooking. Other times you make up a gravy. And we'll be doing a gravy episode coming up real soon. This, I'm going to be using a strong bone broth, which is another common ingredient in the 18th century recipes. And then we're going to come in and kind of fill it up the rest of the way with water. We don't necessarily have to go all the way over the top of this, but we're gonna come in here with a pint of water. And this is ready to go, just like this. We're gonna put a tight fitting lid on this and set it on the fire and let it stew for at least 2 hours, possibly 3. Here's our lid, and this is ready to go. I'm gonna put this on the fire, and since it's gotta cook so long, I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna cook this or stew this outside. Well, the smell of this is incredible. We can smell this cooking 30 feet away from the campfire, and it looks like it's going to be really, really good. We finished this up with a little bit of breadcrumb or raspings, as they would call them in the 18th century, over the top, and then some little lemon slices around to make it look nice. Let's find out just what it tastes like. Let's see how this works out. Oh, Wow. That is really, really good. The skin is tremendous on this thing, and it's very kind of thick skin. It's really great part of the flavor. And then you have all those other, wonderful, rich flavors. And this, we can go ahead and sort of make a gravy out of what is left over in the stewing materials and have that poured over the top. But I didn't want to, mask what's going on here with too much of that. Boy, that's got some tremendous flavor. Very, very wonderful and tender. Superb. If you get a chance to have duck and stew it like this with this wonderful 18th century recipe, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it a lot. Dear Mrs. Crocombe, it was with great excitement and joy that we received your parcel in the spring. Please convey our humblest thanks to Lady Braybrooke. The interesting delicacies were so thoughtful and much loved. Miss Ivy was especially fond of the plum cake and has added the recipe to her collection. Autumn is quickly approaching. We can feel it in the chill of the morning and hear it in the sound of the cicadas and smell it in the turning of the leaves. The coming coolness is greatly to be wished for, as there are several hard jobs to be finished that the summer heat makes most difficult. Of prime importance is a log cabin that must be finished before the snows come. While considering the appropriate dish to send back to Audley End House, I chose a recipe that would reflect both the old world and the new. An Indian pudding. Puddings are such traditional fare in England, yet the ingredients to make this Indian pudding originate in these United States, namely maize, maple syrup, and blueberries. Being common fare in the United States, I hope you might be amused by the novelty of a maize pudding. As I understand, the English consider maize to be a food more suited to animals, but we of the Americas consume it with regularity and no ill effects. Being mindful of the long transit and the nature of a pudding, I have packaged the ingredients along with the recipe, trusting to your capable hands to fashion the pudding in your kitchen. I have not the least doubt of your interest that the recipe comes from one of the earliest truly American cookbooks, American Cookery by Amelia Simmons. I look forward to hearing how the recipe is received. Your most humble servant, John Townsend. I want to thank everyone at English Heritage and at Audley End House. Thank you for this wonderful collaboration. It's been a lot of fun. And I hope Mrs. Crocombe enjoys making this recipe. It is very good. I'm sure they will enjoy it. And make sure to check out English Heritage's site where they're going to receive this package and make this recipe. That ought to be a lot of fun. Thank you for all your amazing support in everything you do, and thanks for watching. So what's this? It's a recipe from 1767 called Pigeons in a Hole. Thanks for joining us today. So today's recipe comes from The Modern Art of Cookery Improved by Anne Shackelford. This is one of the cookbooks that we've been printing. This one I don't think we've actually done a recipe out of before. Let me read it to you. It's called Pigeons in a Hole. Season your pigeons with beaten mace, pepper, and salt. Put a piece of butter into the belly of each. Put them into a soup dish and pour over them a batter made of a quart of milk, 6 eggs, 6 spoonfuls of flour with a little grated ginger and salt. Bake it. Send it to the table as hot as you can. That's Anne Shackelford's directions. Sounds like a very interesting recipe. That's why I was kind of drawn to this one. A little different than your standard chicken pie. This one's got a batter that we pour on top and bake it. Really excited to see what this one's going to turn out like, because I don't think I've done anything quite like this one before. This recipe calls for pigeons, but pigeons can be very difficult to come up with, at least where we're at, so today I'm using a Cornish game hen that you can find in just about any supermarket. Let's get this guy prepped up. It's very simple. We're going to take a little bit of mace, a little bit of salt and pepper, and I'm just going to sprinkle these guys on the outside and then just kind of wipe it over the whole thing, top and bottom. Now, depending on how spicy you want it, obviously you get to choose that. There we go. And then it says to put a piece of butter into the belly. And we've got a much bigger opening here in a Cornish game hen than you would have in a standard pigeon. So I'm going to take a decent sized butter and put that into the cavity here. Now, basically, our bird is ready, and I've already prepped it right into the soup bowl that we'll be using later on in our recipe. But we're going to set this aside and work on the batter. This batter is very simple. I've got another nice big bowl that we can work in. I've got, now it called for 6 eggs. I went down to 5 eggs because undoubtedly their eggs weren't as large as the eggs that we get at the supermarket today. They're all giant, super giant eggs. So let's get these kind of whisked up a little bit. Just need to get them so we can mix them. Now I've got a quart of milk, and we will just whisk that in. We've got 6 spoonfuls of flour, and we're going to get that in. And we've got some spices also to bring into this mix. Got some salt here. We're going to put in about a teaspoonful. And it calls for ginger also, so probably a half a teaspoonful of ground ginger, which wouldn't have been something I would have guessed. Now this seems like maybe it's a little bit too liquidy, but they do say it's a batter. This is not a dough, so we don't want it to have very much stiffness to us. We need to be able to pour this on top of it. So I'm willing to trust this recipe and find out what it's going to do. I mean, I might naturally add a little bit more flour, but we're going to go with the recipe. We're going to do it just like they did it in the 18th century. Let me bring in the bird and we'll pour this on top. Okay, so I'm worried about that bird kind of sticking up out of it. But I think it's going to be all right. I think that this batter is going to grow up around it and help protect it. But now it goes into the oven, and it just says bake it, right? So we've got to do some guessing here. I'm going to put this in the oven at 350 degrees, and I'm betting that this is going to take well over an hour, maybe even as much as 2 hours. We'll find out. Let's get this into the oven. Here's the finished piece. It looks good. It smells done. I mean, I'm not perfectly sure, but this cooked about an hour, 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours, depending on exactly how big that bird is that you're trying to cook in there. And you know, the problem with it, of course, as I look down upon this, is like, okay, how am I gonna plate this? How am I gonna serve this? I can imagine in the 18th century, of course, we would have had multiple little birds in here, maybe 3 or 4 pigeons in here, and you could serve up the whole pigeon. You could just scoop one of those pigeons out of there and put it on the plate around with the surrounding fluff. But I'll have to see what I can do about that. Well, this has turned out very interestingly, and I just can't wait to figure out what it tastes like. So let's see. I mean, let's try a piece of this egg puff stuff first. Well, that's better than I expected it to be. That's very good. It's very good. So, and how can you get a bird wrong, right? It's been baked inside of this, so it's a very gentle baking. It's actually much easier to not overcook it or burn it, obviously. Wow. Have you ever had a recipe where you just needed a little something to push it over the top? That's what we're going to be doing today. A brown gravy from the 18th century. Thanks for joining us today. Now, this is a recipe for a gravy. There are different kinds of gravy that show up in the recipe books in the 18th century. Sometimes gravy just means the juices that come out of a piece of meat while it's being cooked, and then you'll use that later on. And then other times you have a made-up gravy, maybe that doesn't have the juices of a particular piece of meat in it. That's what we're going to be working on here. This is a made gravy. This recipe is from the 1787 recipe book called The London Art of Cookery by John Farley. Let me give you a quick run over this one. Brown gravy. Take a half a pint of water and the same quantity of ale or small beer that is not bitter. Cut an onion and a little piece of lemon peel small. Take 3 cloves, a blade of mace, some whole pepper, a spoonful of mushroom pickle, the same quantity of ketchup and an anchovy. Put a piece of butter the size of a hen's egg into a saucepan, and when it is melted, shake in a little flour. Let it be a little brown. Then by degrees stir in the above ingredients and let it boil a quarter of an hour. Then strain it. There you go, a brown gravy. It's a gravy that we can make without using the juices of a piece of meat. We're going to start off, we've got our little saucepan here. We're going to start off with our butter. We've got a nice little bit of butter there, and we're going to get this melted. Our butter is all melted. Let's put in a little bit of flour here. Just shake in a little bit. We don't need this to be a lot, but it wants it to brown up. So what we're making here is a simple primitive roux. It's not what they would have called it in the English cookbooks, but a little bit of flour, a little bit of butter. That's looking pretty good. We don't want it too thick. It's browned up just a touch. Now we can put in our onions. There we are. And I've got my little bit of lemon peel. There we go. We don't want to burn these up. A little bit of sizzle, obviously, might happen while we're adding these things. As soon as our onions start to look a little cooked here, a little starting to be transparent, we're going to add in our other ingredients. We've got our ale or our non-bitter beer. Stir that up a little bit. And we also have mushroom ketchup. I don't have any mushroom pickle, but I've got mushroom ketchup, and it called for ketchup, so we're going to add that. And we're going to add a little bit of water here, maybe not as much as they called for it, because our pot isn't too big. And now we can also add in our other spice ingredients. So I've got a couple whole peppercorns. We've got a couple of whole cloves. We've got our whole blade of mace. And then our final ingredient here, we've got our anchovy, and that will melt in there. And now it says to just boil this up for about a quarter of an hour, and then we'll strain this all off. And we'll see how it thickens up. That's the real question as to exactly what this is going to be like. But now we're just going to let this simmer along. This smells tremendous for a gravy. I'm really interested to see. Let me test this out all by itself, and wow, it's got a lot of different complex flavors in it, and of course the mushroom ketchup in there really, stands out. I can't wait to try this. Let's try this out on the duck. The gravy on the duck. Let's find out just how this turns out. Now the duck is good all by itself. And if you're interested in that, make sure to check out that episode. But let's try that out with the gravy here. Whoa. Boy, that gravy is really good. It really sets off a meat. And this combination is really, really good. So one of the interesting things about this is that anchovy in there. You would expect maybe, some bad anchovy flavor to come through. The anchovy comes through, but not in a bad way. It's blended with these other flavors, so it really tones it down, but it's got a nice little peak to it. This is a really good gravy to, bring something up that might seem a little too dull. So wonderful flavors and just that little bit of bite to it, which I really enjoy. Beer. The last thing that comes into my mind when I think about beer is beer soup. Let's make beer soup from 1787. Thanks for joining us today. So here on the Townsends channel, we're digging into history. We're trying to understand 18th century North America, the influences, and we're looking for those things that don't fit. And we're trying to understand them all the more. And we're looking at these other cultures that influence North America. And here, we're talking about cooking. What are the food things that don't fit? Well, we've got this 18th century German cookbook, and we've got something that doesn't fit, at least with our modern thought process, right? A beer soup? I mean, what is beer soup and why don't we still have it? So let's look at this recipe. So this is a 1787 recipe. It's translated by the folks down at Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Mix a small spoonful of flour, sweet cream, a couple of egg yolks, and light beer. It probably means small beer, right? Add a little piece of butter and sugar to taste. Bring to a boil, stir constantly. Serve over thin slices. Simple recipe, but beer soup, I have never had beer soup. I don't know what this is going to turn out like. So let's get started on this one. Okay, let's put all our ingredients together in our little cooking pot. We've got our beer here. Again, the recipe they translated as light beer or small beer. Got a nice little quantity here. We'll go ahead and we'll put some flour in here. It said a small spoonful. I'm not sure exactly how much. I'm just going to put in a little bit of flour here. Again, we're just kind of guessing on this recipe. Because there are no ingredients, it is really up to our taste. I've got some cream. And probably got a cup of cream here. I don't think I want to use all that. Let's go half a cup of cream. I have some egg yolks. So this will thicken it up here. We're going to just whisk these egg yolks up a little bit. We got 2 egg yolks. There we go. So there's not much left to this. The last, it says sugar to taste. Well, I have no idea how much sugar is going to be the right amount, and I might even wait till the very end to sugar this as it starts to cook up, and I can get a kind of a flavor note here. But I'm going to start with about a tablespoon of, and it calls for brown sugar. Let me get this quick stir to get all that flour in there. And our last ingredients before it goes on the fire is some butter. Again, it doesn't give an ingredient here, so I'm going to use about a small hen's eggs worth of butter. I think that should be about right. And now we're going to set this over the fire. And remember, it calls for stirring it constantly. We don't want this to burn. It's got a lot of that cream in there. So I haven't tested this recipe. I really don't know exactly where this is going to go. And trying to interpret this recipe, understand it. From what I know of, I mean, I've heard of beer soup before. But, how does it fit in the cuisine? And I believe that this is a higher, or let's say a fancy version of a poor food. You can imagine taking out the expensive ingredients of this one. not putting in the egg yolks, possibly using milk instead of cream, and maybe no sugar, and you get a very, very simple soup made with beer and something like flour or breadcrumbs or toast that's boiled in this. It shows up in literature and ideas of poor people's food in Northern Europe. That's definitely a possibility here, that the roots of this, or maybe vice versa. That poor version has its roots in this dish. I'm not sure which way it goes. I'm certainly not an expert in sort of that Northern European, 16th century or 17th century food history, but very interesting. So here it is, beer soup. It's ready. Smells great. Very, very interesting. I can't wait to try this out. But if we're going to try out beer soup, we need to be someplace special. Well, welcome to the Nutmeg Tavern. This is obviously the place where you're going to have to try your beer soup. And who knows, this might have been something like they would have served in taverns. So this is going to be the perfect place to try this out. So I've got my toast here, and I've got my nice warm beer soup. Let me give it a stir, because that's got butter in it, and that kind of comes to the top. And tell you what, this has got a very, very interesting smell to it, and I'm just really curious. So let's find out. Whoa, those are some really... This is really, really interesting. Okay. I've got there's some flavors here that are very reminiscent of, boy, I wish I could put my finger on it. The beer flavor comes through in a very, very interesting way. And again, this is meant to be a small beer or a light beer, let's say. That's a kind of a modern term for a small beer, low alcoholic beer. I chose a beer that wasn't very hoppy. I didn't want a lot of hops here. That's not my favorite thing. But you get this very interesting beer flavor in there, not too strong, like cream of beer soup, right? But it's got some other flavors that I just cannot identify. I'm going to have to get some other people to try this out. You should try this out at home, because I think you'll find this really interesting. Today we got a special guest, Michael Dragoo, and what are we cooking today?
It's a chicken fricassee of different manners. It's from a French cookbook this time.
Sounds great. Come along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So Michael, tell us a little bit about the history of this particular recipe.
Sure. It's from a French cookbook I just got from you guys.
Right.
It's a translation from a 1755 cookbook. And this is a fricassee, and there are fricassees would normally have a white sauce. Mm-hmm. This is a chicken broth base. They're a beef base. It's very simple. I try to bring things that anyone can do, and this is a simple one.
So what's the time period on it?
1755. The translation occurs in the 1770s.
Okay, so this is originally a French recipe.
Yes.
So it's in the French cookbooks in 1755, and then 20 years later, somebody in England is translating this for us.
Yep.
And so if you'd like to follow along, here are the ingredients that you'll need.
The ingredients are pretty simple. 2 chicken breasts, some butter, some sweet herbs, which are sage, rosemary, thyme, basil, white wine, chicken broth, a couple of eggs. You want the yolks of the eggs, fresh parsley, a lemon, some mushrooms if you prefer. The recipe reads both ways. Salt, some flour, and some cream. And that's it.
And as usual, for many of these period recipes, there aren't any specific measurements. This is whittled down for a much bigger recipe, so we're just going to kind of wing it as we put this together. Hey, Michael, what's our first step?
We are going to get some butter and some flour going for a little roux. We're going to throw our chicken in, and then we're going to start adding our other ingredients.
Okay.
So we're going to...
You're not going to dump all that butter in there?
I'm not.
Okay.
There we go. We're just going to add our chicken in. You can use dark meat, white meat. I've got a chicken breast here is it. You could mix it. The recipe calls for us to break down, to reduce a whole chicken. If you wanted a little more savory, a little more moist, you could use thighs and legs. Meat.
You could probably get creative and use rabbit instead, or even
Absolutely.
squirrel.
Absolutely, but not today. Not when I'm here. The recipe says you don't have to use mushrooms. You can if you want. And we're going to add some white wine. The recipe doesn't call for how much or what kind. It's a French recipe. And if you're just looking to see where the vineyards are for the different types of grapes, I would guess that if you're just looking for a white wine, it'd be the type of white wine you're living that's near where you're living. And we're going to throw a little chicken stock in. This is from a past cooking experience I had, so it's got some chicken and some other drippings in it. This whole recipe takes no more than 15 minutes and maybe 10 minutes of prep time. It really is pretty quick. Alrighty, John, the recipe asks for a nosegay.
Okay.
And a nosegay in this time period could have been a bunch of sweet smelling flowers or sweet herbs. It doesn't say which. I've
I
elected
think he means sweet herbs.
sweet herbs.
Yeah.
It's just asking for some fresh parsley. So if you want to just tear some up in there, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so here's your liaison. This is egg yolk and your broth
Perfect.
whisked up.
I'm not going to
Pour
use
that
it all
in.
because
Yeah.
I'm doing a reduced recipe, but I think they've mixed it with the broth so that I don't have scrambled eggs
Yeah,
introducing it
be
into
very
something
gently.
hot. Yeah. I don't know how much to do. I'm just guessing, and that's.
It's just to thicken this up.
Yep. I'm going to quit right there. Thank you. I'm going to introduce my cream also right now. Get that in here. And we're going to introduce a lemon into this. Just to give it a little citrus, a little brightening. Thank you. A fricassee is really nothing more. Technically, it's some form of protein simmered in a sauce, a white sauce. But in this French cookbook from 1755, they have all sorts of different sauces they're calling fricassees. And this one happens to be a chicken.
So it had some wording in there about bringing this down to a short sauce. Can we talk
Yes.
about that?
Well, a short sauce just means you've almost reduced the liquids out of it. So you've got this great, just like you do with when you're making gravy for dinner. You let it cook down until it's just
Nice and thick.
nice and thick. Yes, sir. All right, and one last ingredient I forgot about. I should have added this near the beginning. Is just some salt, and once again, it's to taste. Doesn't mention any other pepper or anything like that. Just some salt and some sweet herbs. So this thing is simmering very nicely, and we're just about ready.
This smells great.
It does.
It's time to dig into this.
I'm digging.
And it
I'm digging.
looks like it's going to be really good.
The wine,
Whoa.
the lemon, the sweet herbs are not expected.
All right.
Man, that's good.
Yeah, the wine and the lemon, along with the mushroom flavor and all that.
We're so used to throwing so many different seasonings in these things that it takes away. This is chicken. This is very elegant. For as simple as it was. 6 ingredients?
Right.
7?
And right over the open fire, and it only took 10, 15 minutes max.
Oh, my.
Other than the prep time. Excellent recipe, right out of the 18th century. Both that idea that it's a French recipe,
Oh,
that is interpreted into English recipe.
this is the translated, the entire title of this thing. It's The Dinner of the Court, or The Art of Work of All Kinds of Ailments to Serve the Best Tables Next to the Four Seasons.
Right.
How can you not enjoy anything from that cookbook?
Translated into the professed
Yeah.
cook. Back in the kitchen, Michael Dragoo, special guest. He's brought us a special recipe.
Yes, trout in champagne.
Sounds excellent. Thanks for joining us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Tell us a little bit more about this particular recipe.
Sure, it's It's translated from a French cookbook, a 1755 cookbook. In the 1770s, an Englishman translates it. He turns those 4 tomes into a 1 volume.
Right.
This reprint, which you guys offer, is almost 600 pages, and it's by far my favorite cookbook. And I own close to 50 1700s cookbooks.
It's
and
pretty
this is,
easy to interpret and
well,
understand.
like I said a little bit ago, there's over 20 pages of just sauces. It just goes into such wonderful detail, and it's not 1 or 2 of something. There's page after page of something, so it's really a nice cookbook.
Excellent cookbook.
Yeah.
You'll find a link for this guy down in the description section. So, how are we going to? Do we need anything special for this?
You know, this is it for ingredients. There's some shallots, little lemon, salt, pepper, 2 cloves. We've got butter, flour, mushrooms.
We got
Trout.
champagne, obviously.
Yeah, not as much as we started with, but
Yeah.
we need to refresh that, I think. And some broth. It just says a broth, so I've used a chicken broth.
What kind of trout are we using here?
This is an ocean trout.
Okay.
And this recipe is really reduced because they're talking about an entire trout. And
giant
those 2
trout,
fillets would be good size, so we're just reducing these. Once again, in this recipe, there are no quantities, no weights, no nothing. So they're just saying, you know,
A little of this,
a little of this,
that,
a little of that. Yeah. So that's what we're going to start with. So, alrighty, we're going to add some butter to our pan. It calls for a brisk fire, but we don't want it to be so hot that it's burning my butter. And we're going to get that going. And it's a pretty brisk fire. We're going to add some flour to make a roux to thicken this a bit. We're going to add our mushrooms. Going to get them going. Then we're going to add our trout. We're going to let these mushrooms simmer just a little bit first. If you could hand me the champagne. There we go. We're just going to, once again, we're really reducing this recipe, so I'm guessing as to how much. Alrighty. We've just introduced the champagne. I need some chicken broth. Thank you very much. And there we go. And I'm going to introduce some salt, some pepper. And we're going to add, it says a couple of cloves. We're going to add 1 clove since this is a reduced recipe. And that's it for spices. Okay, I'm going to add a little more of the chicken broth. I'm going to add a little more of the champagne. The trout cooks very quickly, so I don't need to have it in here very long at all. I just want these mushrooms to start releasing some of their liquid before I put the trout in. I've never cooked any seafood in champagne before, and it has a different flavor than the red or the white wines I've used previously. This is going to be interesting. I'm going to add some shallots. So again, it doesn't say how many. I'm just going to get them in here. I'm going to squeeze a little lemon.
So, what do you think, Michael? Is it time for the trout?
It is. Let's do this.
Okay.
Let's do this. I'm going to put it all in. And I'm just going to keep it moving. I don't want it to overcook. Thank you. I don't want it to overcook. The colors in this are pretty too. This is a great little dish. I'm going to taste this very quickly. A little more chicken broth. I'm going to add a little more salt. We're just sneaking up on this, just like you would any dish you're making. You're just going to taste as you go.
We do have some really good flavors and scents coming off of
Yes.
this. It's got a wonderful smell to it.
Unexpected. I'm smelling that clove, just a single clove. The champagne is not the same smell as my wines. It's this is different. This is refreshing. I haven't tried this before. This is a cold test drive. I've gotten more wonderful results from this cookbook than I have. If I had to own one period correct set of cookbooks, these 4 volumes would be my pick. They're so simple. You're not working with very much, but it's the take on them. It's the little twists that they do that really set these off.
What do you think, Michael? It looks pretty good. Is it done?
It is done. We are ready to take it off.
Okay. wonderful smells. It looks great. This is served with sippets, with little toasted breads, of course, which is real common in these sorts of recipes.
The parsley's just a garnish on top. It didn't call for it in
Yeah.
the recipe. Trout.
Whoa.
Trout, some mild onions, and champagne, salt and pepper.
Yeah.
That's it. There's nothing else in here. That's good. I'm not a fish fan, and that's very good. That's very good. It's mild.
There's some excellent flavors here. Probably
Yeah.
the only thing missing is a little nutmeg. Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I brought 2 recipes with no nutmeg.
I can't believe it.
Yeah,